Enthusiasm for Trevor Lawrence is at an all-time high, and I'll tell you why here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for joining us here on Locked On Jaguars. I am your host, Tony Wiggins, and we appreciate you joining us and making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars because it's your team every day. A reminder that we are free on all platforms. Wherever you get your podcast, you do not have to pay us anything. We are free. Make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube page as well. I want to talk about Trevor Lawrence. As I promised you on my last podcast, which was a couple of days ago, I had to miss yesterday because of some medical issues, but I'm back today and we're going to talk about Trevor Lawrence because it seems like yesterday while I was gone, everybody else decided they were going to do it. So I have to remind everyone that I actually said 2 days ago that I was going to do this podcast about Trevor Lawrence. In the third segment, I'm going to also, after we go through Trevor, this segment, and then the next segment, talk about him and his weapons a little bit. We're going to go over the news and notes from training camp and tell you about some things that will get you a little bit excited about the season if you're a Jaguars fan. So let's not bury the lead. Let's get right to Trevor Lawrence. Why is everyone so happy? This is not in response to Chris Sims all of a sudden giving a backtracking about his criticism of Trevor Lawrence that he's had in the past and what type of prospect he is. Based on him watching Trevor warm up at the Hall of Fame game, he's totally changed his tune. And it's a little weird to me, too. I'll discuss that a little bit, but I'll also let you know that that's not the crux because I had decided that I was going to do this before Chris Sims came out and basically changed his mind. So my point about Trevor Lawrence was something that we had discussed here on the Locked On podcast, Locked On Jaguars podcast, and that is how would this year be different and what do I want to see from him and the coaching staff and how his progression is going, not play-by-play progression, but his progression for his career is going to go, his career arc. One of the things we discussed last year was, and I just have to give a little backdrop about Trevor, was that, one, he was the press secretary, right? He was always out. Every time something went wrong, they knew the one person that could make the fan base not go crazy and make the fan base continue to have a level of enthusiasm was if they pushed Trevor in front of the microphone and had him basically speak and calm and soothe the fire that was in the belly of all the natives, which is the Jaguar fan base. Because trust me, there were a lot of reasons last year for fans and for people that support the team to basically lose a lot of their enthusiasm. And most of it had to do with Urban Meyer and the continued losing of the franchise as a whole. And this year, that's different. We've heard from it maybe 2 or 3 times, but we've heard from other people. And the questions are no longer about off the field issues. It's about how he's getting better and what he's done to improve. And I like the fact that the coaches don't sit there and talk about how great he is or how he's a war daddy or how great he's going to be and all of those things. What they mostly discuss is how he's done what they've asked him to do and what his approach is, and the fact that he continues to improve and get better and that he has a lot of work to do day by day. That's coaching. I don't care how highly acclaimed someone is, you never want to treat them as if they've arrived already. And Trevor had a lot to learn and a lot to improve at and a lot to get better at. Now, to his credit, he spoke on something that I didn't even think about. The fact that he had that surgery after his college years, during the draft process, he worked out early. If you guys remember, he worked out early so he could go ahead and have the surgery on his shoulder, came back to camp, got right into it and got at it. That he never really had a chance to rehab. He never really had a chance to adjust to the things that he was going to be able to do in the National Football League. And then when you add in all of those distractions from camp last year, it wasn't going to be enough for him to just be here. And that's one of the things that I told everyone who would listen to me. And I did a podcast about it the day the Jaguars secured the number 1 pick. My point is I've been around. I covered this team for over 13 years, right? So my point was, if we're going to really get this right, we need to get it right on all aspects. And one of the analogies that I used was, you can hit the lottery. You can put on a colorful shirt and buy a sports car and buy a white horse and get your 12 girlfriends and you'll be broke in 2 years. Or you can hit the lottery and hire a very shrewd financial advisor, make sure everything is above board, put yourself on a budget, invest your money, take care of it properly, and you'll be rich forever. I wanted this franchise to be rich forever. I wanted them, I sound like Rick Ross. I wanted them to be rich forever. I wanted them to actually be very judicious and do everything sound and fundamentally correct when it comes to Trevor Lawrence, because it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, so that they have a chance here to do what Indy did with Peyton Manning, and of course what ultimately everybody wants to do what New England did with Tom Brady. But that you have this longevity and you do it right and you give him the proper support system, and that you really, really cultivate an atmosphere where you're protecting your assets and you're treating this like a once in a lifetime opportunity, as opposed to treating it like you're celebrating his presence every single day. I think from a fan's perspective, because for so long this organization has lost, there was a tendency to feel like you wanted to celebrate his presence every day. Like there was this barbecue every day that we finally got Trevor. Well, at some point they were going to have to play. And if you weren't doing the right things by Trevor Lawrence the way that you should have been, which the Jaguars were not doing, his presence would not matter. It would feel like a waste of time. So what they've done now with hiring Doug Pederson and bringing in Mike McCoy and bringing in Press Taylor and all of the other people that they've changed the organization and the way that they've approached the organization and allowed Trevor Lawrence to just get better and improve, instead of worrying about things about ticket sales and worrying about all of these other things and parading him around like he's some show trophy, as opposed to treat him like he's a football player that has to do football things in order for football games to be won. I'm starting to feel like they're on the right track and they're doing things differently. He's bigger. He's stronger. He's throwing the ball better than he ever has. And that has led people who were skeptical of whether or not Trevor Lawrence was going to be any good to start to change the way that they feel about him, even though they haven't even seen him play a game yet. And that's the part that in segment 2, I'll talk about how ridiculous it is. Not that they see what they see and they decided that they're going to go and change their opinion in Chris Sims, but the fact that that opinion even existed in the first place and it could be changed without you even seeing him play a game from last year to this year. That means that that opinion wasn't strong enough to be standing on in the first place. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of the things that Trevor has done to improve, what the team has actually done. We've gone over it. We've glossed over it a little bit, but what have they actually done to really, really improve? And how will it manifest itself on the field for the Jaguars this season? That's the most important question, because everyone wants to win. I'll explain all of that to you in just a second here as we continue on Locked On Jaguars. But first, I have to tell you about BetOnline.net, because it's the fastest and easiest way to check all of your sporting betting needs. Find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. There's a lot to be betting on. I got wind last night that either the first, second, or third week of November, one of those weeks, we might see Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence actually get into the ring in Las Vegas. So this is where you want to get that information from, to find out the latest on that, as well as all the other sports that are going on. Even if they're off season, they're still moving. Things are still happening, like in the NBA. They're still talking about Kevin Durant. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today, because BetOnline is where the game starts. And you guys brave it out with me and start here with me on Locked On Jaguars every single day, because it's your team every day, and we appreciate you tuning in here and also watching on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. What has the team done to alleviate some of the things that may have gotten Trevor Lawrence's way last year in terms of, by the way, last year wasn't a wash. Last year, if anything, shows you how not to go about business as an NFL team. And it showed Trevor what he should not be expecting from an NFL team. And now he knows what it really does look like. And it doesn't look like sunshine and rainbows all the time. It looks like hard work, and it looks like a day-to-day attention to detail and things that you have to pay attention to. And it looks like accountability. And I've always thought that guys who were elite athletes wanted that type of structure. Have the Jaguars been able to do that and deliver that for him this year? Yes, they have. Have they made decisions like re-signing Cam Robinson and adding Brandon Sheriff to that offensive line, one of which I agree with, one of which I didn't. But now, as I told you Monday or 2 days ago, I have to go back and say I'm glad they kept Cam Robinson because he had a hell of a camp. Keeping guys around that can protect your quarterback, not sparing any expense when it comes to building the offensive front and building the offensive line, helps his confidence. One, it keeps him off the ground, but two, it lets him know that you're committed to doing the things that you have to do in front of him. Going out and getting Christian Kirk, even though it was much maligned and criticized by a lot of people as too much money, we've broken that down ad nauseum. It was not. If you really pay attention to contracts, getting Zay Jones, I thought might have been a little bit too much money. Turns out it might not have been because he's also had a very good training camp. And then the investment that they made, even though it was a one-year deal to go out and get Evan Ingram to play tight end and move tight end, he's been one of Trevor Lawrence's favorite targets throughout the preseason and camp. So far, so good. Keeping Marvin Jones Jr. around. He's the ultimate team player. He's the veteran in the room. He really raises the character, the football character of the wide receiver group and the whole team. Getting Travis Etienne back from injury and hopefully soon getting James Robinson back on the field. All of those things bode well for Trevor's development. But it's not just about players. It's also about coaches. It's about attitude. It's about allowing him to just do football things, get his body a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, focus on muscle memory and ball placement, feet always pointing in the right direction. Every single throw looks alike. Those are the things that Chris Sims said that he saw in his workout the other day that made him believe that the Jaguars may be on to something with Trevor Lawrence. So the only thing I say about that is this: when you're evaluating guys coming out of college, you can't go from thinking there's 4 or 5 guys better than him to all of a sudden thinking, well, if he continues to do this, the Jaguars are. You have to assume. I know I didn't finish my sentence, but y'all know where I was going. You have to assume that when a guy gets NFL coaching, that he's going to fix little small mechanical things. He was drafted based on his long-term potential and his overall talent. He wasn't drafted because of, and Chris played the game. So Chris Sims is a podcaster, by the way, and he's all over PFF and everything else. But he should have known better that when you draft a prospect, that even if he has a few mechanical flaws like his feet pointing in the wrong direction, that those are things that are correctable and fixable by a good NFL coach. Those aren't reasons why you don't pick a guy number 1. Every reason why you pick Trevor Lawrence number 1 is the reason why they picked him number 1. Every reason you pick a guy like that number 1 is because 12 months later, Chris Sims is looking at him and he's sounding like his jaw is about to drop to the floor because he's floored based on what he's seen this kid do. So what that tells me is, well, maybe that harsh assessment that there were 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 guys better than him. I even thought at one point when he listed all the quarterbacks, he had Trevor ranked way down in the 30s or so. I might be wrong about that, but there's no way that – I'm going to tell you how ridiculous it is. If you thought that poorly of him, but now you all of a sudden think, hey, I could be wrong. What did you use as a barometer to tell you that? You watched him warm up for 45 minutes. So what that tells you is, just like that isn't enough that should be able to change your mind, maybe you shouldn't have felt the way you felt in the first place if it did. Because he hasn't played a game yet. The last time he played a game, you still thought he was a bad quarterback or not very good or not generational the way everyone else. But all of a sudden now you do. But what has he done to change your mind? Absolutely nothing. His mechanics? That's easy. That's an easy fix. So this is why there's a difference sometimes between whether or not a guy is ready to play or ready to be great right now, as opposed to where he's drafted. And we have to be very careful with that, because drafting is all about macro, big picture. It's not about what the guy is right now today. But he's right about one thing. Trevor has improved his technique. He has improved his form and having his feet pointed. Every throw does seem like it looks consistently the same. It just shouldn't surprise you that happened when the kid gets real good coaches and has an entire offseason to work on all of that stuff, as opposed to rehabbing injuries. That's the thing about injuries that people don't get. When you rehab in the offseason, well, I don't care if you're a quarterback, running back, you're rehabbing to fix something to get you back to where you were. The time you miss is if you weren't rehabbing, what you would be doing is actually improving where you are and getting better. And that's the point about rehab that people don't really understand. Like, guys don't really get better during the season, unless it's just getting used to the speed of the game. If a guy is not very strong at the beginning of the season, he ain't going to get much stronger by the end of the year. Where you get stronger is in the off season, because during the season, it's mostly about maintenance. It's mostly about just taking care of what you have already, as opposed to building and growing. So the fact that Trevor Lawrence had rehab during the entire draft process, and then was going through the draft process, and then he wasn't really, in my opinion, well coached. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that his quarterback coach or his offensive coordinator weren't experienced, but it means that there was so much dysfunction going on in the organization that no one really had the chance to do what he's having done now, which is to be able to cultivate and muscle memory and just work on specific things and just concentrate solely on being a quarterback and being a leader of his teammates and being just one of the guys, as opposed to wearing it felt like he had this corporate jacket on last year and he had to be something that was making up for what the Jaguars lacked, for lack of better terms. So now that has changed. We'll talk about some of the weapons, some of the things that he has working for him, and give you some other news and notes from training camp. And we'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. All right, so third and final segment here of Locked On Jaguars, reminding you to check out fantasy football. If you have a fantasy football league or team, you need to be listening to Vinny Iyer of Locked On Fantasy Football, one of the best in the business, one of the outstanding fantasy football guys in the industry, and really just something that you need to pay attention to is the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. They're free on all platforms as well. As my phone is on the other side of the room and it's going off, but we are not going to edit this video because I am doing too good and I'm running it down here talking about your Jacksonville Jaguars. So some of the other weapons that we need to go over. Jamal Agnew came back and is now working full time. He's really, really getting it in. He's out there moving around real well on special teams. Look for him to have a little bit of say on the offensive side of the ball also, as someone who's going to be able to make a contribution and make some plays. All you need is just two or three plays a game. Chris Manhertz. I often overlook Chris Manhertz when I talk about the tight ends because everyone just assumes that Chris Manhertz is a blocker. Chris Manhertz can catch too. He's an athlete. He played basketball. I like the way he looks. And when you want to draw a tight end up in a lab, a guy that can be a little bit of a dual guy for you, that's what Chris Manhertz is. So he might not be this great pass catcher, but you need another dude. And when you go to those two tight end packages, let me tell you something. If everyone assumes that he's a blocker and he leaks out and he can catch the ball in the red zone, that's just another feather in your cap, especially if you get all the other things working. And Chris Manhertz can be a dump off or an option, one or two plays a game. I'm going to keep harping on those one or two plays. When I mentioned Jamal Agnew, when I mentioned Chris Manhertz, I'm talking about one or two plays a game, plays that keep the sticks moving, plays that get you a little bit extra because of design, because these are the things that Doug Pederson is known for, and these are the things that actually help you win football games. How many times did you see a drop ball or something happen where it's like, dang, we can't have that happen, we're not good enough? But now when you start getting these plus plays from guys you don't expect it from, it really, really, really does help this football team. I'm interested to see. They held out Laviska Shenault. I'm interested to see if all of the hard work and all of the things that Laviska Shenault did in the offseason, like showing up and being at OTAs when everyone else, when the veterans were released, he stayed behind and he was at the involuntary workouts. He was always there. How does that translate to now him getting confident and getting back to being the Laviska Shenault he was in year one? We've seen in practices where they've used him and actually handed him the ball on end arounds, found a way to get him the ball in the middle of the field. I've seen a drop or two here or there, so you probably don't want to really focus on that too much. But right now, he's their fourth receiver, and I think it's important that as a guy who is one of those dudes that I'm not going to say he's Debo Samuel because I'm sick of everybody making that analogy, but what I will tell you is he is a kid or a young man that has a certain skill set that one or two plays. So if he's the third guy I'm mentioning about one or two plays, now we're looking at 3 to 6 plays. If you add them all together, and these are the plus plays that I'm talking about, getting stuff from guys that you don't expect. The offense might only run 60 plays, and if they do, they run 60 plays, they're probably going to win the game. So 6 of those plays, that's 1/10 of your offensive output, and I'm thinking that those plays could really, really work for first downs, in the red zone, for touchdowns, to keep the sticks moving and keep things going to your advantage. So I think what Doug Pederson has done with Trevor Lawrence and with what he's done in the past, when you think about Trevor Lawrence fitting right into that, you think about all of these different offensive weapons. They have a real good chance to come together and do some things. Now, they have a little bit of a tough schedule because every time you look at the Jaguars and think they're going to do good, you can look at the schedule and you can see guys on the other team and on the other rosters that are going to play well too. But still, it's going to give an outlook and a feeling of optimism as opposed to pessimism, what we've always had here, because you've had no reason to believe that they were going to be better. But Trevor Lawrence is a reason for you guys to be happy. I think the Jaguars have a franchise quarterback. I think he's a franchise human being. I think all of those things match up. And I think he also has the combination of that quarterback coach combination of a guy who is just like him, someone that are going to be able to communicate, and they're going to continue to grow and get better. You guys keep growing and getting better with me here on Locked On Jaguars, and we thank you for making us your first listen every single day because it's your team every day. Make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to start looking ahead to the game against Cleveland. We found out that the starters will play. We don't know how long they're going to go. So it's the first home opener preseason Friday, and we'll review that over the next 2 days to find out exactly who's going to play, what they're going to do, and what we hope to see, and we'll go over that both days. Make sure you take care. Tune in around the Locked On NFL Network for all of your football needs, and stay tuned with us here on Locked On Jaguars every single day because, like I said, it's your team every day. Take care. We'll see you next time.